feeling that I could ever dare to dream. Let's not waste time, we'll take this slow. We've got miles behind us, but miles to go. So let's just break this down to the simplest truth. You and I as one will always be better than two.
Welcome, everybody, to Sweet Home Catoosa. I'm your host, Richard Tharp, and today we've got our special guest here with Mitchell Horner from the state representative side to talk to us about all the great things that he's doing for us behind the scenes in the county here, and to kind of, I guess, really to enlighten us. Like I've been telling everybody, I think a state representative is one of these people that we don't really see or know that well, all the behind the scenes things that go on that actually are vital to our community. So thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this. This is a wonderful platform. I commend you for doing something that outreaches the community, especially in Catoosa County. Being just south of Hamilton County, it's hard to get your own media services out there. And so that's kind of why you haven't, or the average voter doesn't really know much about what's going on at our state level, and even in the local and county areas, because we just don't have a lot of, we have two media sources, which is the newspaper and UCTV. So I commend you for doing a podcast and getting that voice out there.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, if you watch the news at night, we don't get a lot of coverage down here in Catoosa County. Mainly all the news covers up there north of us in Hamilton. So, yeah, it's important for us to find out what's going on in Catoosa County, and that's why we started this. So take us back for a second here and tell us your journey on how you became a state representative,
Absolutely.
why you wanted to be a state representative, and then what do you do for us as a state representative that folks just really don't understand?
Absolutely. Well, my political journey started, I'm going to go way back when I was about 13. My parents were missionaries to the state of Israel. And while we were over there, I mean, it's very political and it's very religious. And so you had to know very quickly where you stood, because your entire social apparatus was defined by who you hung out with, what you believed, and how you believed it, and how strongly you preached what you believed. You would be challenged daily on those beliefs. And so from a very early age, I knew how to conduct myself in that manner and really ask the big questions of what do I believe? What do I want to see in the long term? And so that kind of triggered a lot of different feelings, especially being so young. And I get back to the States, and I see a lot of differences from being over there, kind of in not a war zone, but definitely an emotional and psychological trial period. And coming back here, it's kind of, you have a little PTSD and get back into it, because we have America is blessed to have such comfort and capability that it's a very different world. We don't realize the wonderful lifestyle that we have versus the rest of the world. And so very early on, I believe in American exceptionalism. And so during my high school years, I studied foreign policy. I studied politics religiously. About the age of 18, I wanted to get into politics somehow. So I got involved, at the time was the start of the Syrian Civil War. And so I knew a couple of Syrians because of my time in Israel. And so I went to D.C. They were having a get-together of how do we get senators and congressmen to really look at this issue. And so go up there for about a week, and the entire week they give me Senate-level briefings on the Syrian issue, and then they're like, go preach it. And they sent me in front of Senator Isaacson, all the senators in the state. I was the only person from the South to show up. So they gave me the entire Southern delegation of congressmen and senators. And about 2 days in, they were like, okay, Mitchell, who did you go with to the congressman and senator's office? I was like, it's just me. And they're like, oh, we just left you alone? I'm like, go get him. And so from that, I just fell in love with it. I love the capability of going and preaching what you believe in, but also getting things done. And so I go up there for about a week, and then about a week in, they were trying to get a letter to President Obama at the time to basically get resources to the Syrian people and to build the democratic roots that were fighting for their liberation. And unfortunately, so they had this letter, and so I got about 12 Republicans to sign on to this letter, and they look at it like, oh, we can't use this. I'm like, why can't you use this? They're Republican. I'm like, so our responsibility and our job is to get as much aid as we can to the Syrian people. and they were clearly partisan. And so I was like, I'm tired of this. I'm going back home. So I got into business. I mainly focused on financial advice and working on budgets and fiscal responsibility. I saw, especially in Chattanooga, a lot of businesses don't know how to properly balance their books, and so I got into bookkeeping. I love budgets, and I'm a policy and an Excel nerd, and so. So from there, I always knew that I wanted to do something either locally or federally, and we can all look at the federal government and see the discord it has. And I was like, honestly, I don't want anything to do with DC politics. I've had my fill. It's just corrupt, and it's just a mess. I did some healthcare policy during those years, and that was an eye opener all in itself. And so I was like, I know my skill sets are in federal code and state code, and local politics is just not something that I'm very familiar with and good at. And so I was like, so where can I asked God, where can I serve? I was about 27 at the time, and I was really questioning what I wanted to do in my life, where I wanted to go, how I wanted to do it. And I'm actually driving downtown Atlanta because that's where my wife was at the time, and a girlfriend at the time, I guess. And where I was driving around Atlanta, I was just asking myself, like, well, give me a sign. And I look up, and it's Mitchell Street, right across the street from the Capitol. And I'm like, I swear I didn't know that. I was like, well, there's a sign, I guess. And so I started studying up on state politics. I started studying on what I can do locally and how I can help locally. And I met with a wonderful individual. His name's Matthew Nave out of Chickamauga. We talked about the campaign. We worked on how we could win a race up here. We looked at the math, the people, and I mean, I grew up here. I love this area. And so I knew that if you just worked hard enough, you could win it. And so I saw an opening. That was in 2022, sorry. I saw an opening in 2022, and I took it. And I don't regret it. I just pounded dirt, pounded pavement, door knocked, talked to every group I could get in front of, and I'm very honored to be your state representative.
Wow. Yeah. So I think a lot of folks will kind of look and say, hey, wait a minute. Wow, this guy, and it's an inspiration. A lot of folks will say how young you are, and you're our state representative.
Yes, sir.
And so that commends you for that. So you've been in 2 years. So that's got to be an eye-opener to go down to the state capitol and try to figure out all of that and navigate everything. So talk about your first 2 years in office and what it's been accomplished for us up here in the county.
Absolutely. It's definitely been an eye-opener and a very interesting time down there. When I ran, I definitely ran on an anti-establishment, anti-Atlanta platform, and I still believe in it, which is for so long we've sent resources down to Atlanta and we're not getting our fair share. I want to make sure that Catoosa is, one, getting our fair share, but at the same time, we have more in common with the Chattanooga market, Chattanooga economy, Chattanooga social scene than we do with most of Georgia. And so that mentality is very hard to kind of get away from and kind of center in Atlanta, because we're just, especially this northwest corner, we're just so different than Atlanta principles. And so I go down there. I'm ready to fight the machine, fight the beast. And I get down there, and all the leadership that was toxic is gone. there was new leaders in place, so it was a whole new. Quickly, you had to change your view set of because at the time we had Speaker Ralston. He passed now. As a speaker, he was very tyrannical. He locked down votes. He knew how to get the votes he needed to get his bills across the finish line, and to make sure that he did whatever he had to do to keep putting wins on that chart. He's definitely what you would imagine an old school speaker of Speaker of the House. He knew how to whip those votes, and he did everything he could to do it and to intimidate to where those bills and those budgets made it across the finish line. And I mean, to be frank, that's his job as speaker, but from a Northwest Georgian, and we love a little bit of rebel rousing and saying no, that wasn't going to cut it. So I definitely was going against the grain. And I was ready to fight, so I get down there in the first day, and they showed a little bit of their colors, which is they presented us what was called a rules packet. Every 2 years, they give you rules of how you conduct yourself, how things are going to be conducted in the House, and rarely do they change from one session to the next. Well, they were doing some major changes because there's new leadership and it was a new speaker, and they were trying to make sure that without the power of Ralston there anymore, they wanted to make sure that they could kind of streamline this process
Sure.
without having to use the same methods. And to be frank, we didn't know who going in. You don't know who your friends are and who your enemies are, and you're trying to figure it out. You're trying to see what kind of people are around. It's just a whole new experience, and you're trying to figure out who you can trust down there. So when I got elected, we had what was called a Freedom Caucus, and it was a group of about 7-8 like-minded individuals, very conservative, trying to make sure that we passed more conservative legislation in Atlanta that affected rural and local areas, to make sure our voice was heard in a group. And so I get down there, and the rules that they're changing are very dysfunctional. And I'm like, I can't vote for this. I was like, first, they didn't give it to me until the day of. I was like, I hear there's a rules packet coming. I want to see it. I'm not going to vote on something if I don't see it. And they're like, well, it'll be on your desk. I'm like, when will it be on my desk? Well, it's required 24 hours before you vote on it. It was not on my desk 24 hours. And it was at best on my desk 2 hours before I voted on it. I asked for a list of changes, and leadership said they'd give it to me. They never gave it to me. And so I took myself and my intern at the time, and we sat down at my desk, and you can see on the pictures on the House floor, and we're just going line item by line item, and everybody else was at a big breakfast. I left the breakfast early because I wanted to see these changes, and I never got them. So we're going line item by line item, and it was clear big changes, and I had about 10 votes in my back pocket. I said, if these changes are big and detrimental, we'll vote against it. And I'm like, okay, well, the Democrats locked down on the rules vote. So it comes to a vote, the Democrats locked down. What that means is all the Democrats are voting against it. In this current House, we only have a 10 Republicans vote majority. So if you had 10 votes in your back pocket, you can win the vote. And we had the votes. Everybody said, we'll follow your lead, Mitchell. So I stand up there. I make my point. I was like, I didn't get this on my desk until 2 hours before the vote. I don't agree with these rules. And I was like, is it not true that the speaker can call an end to this vote anytime? And this is my first day in session, so I'm over here still just trying to shaking a little bit, to be frank, and just trying to make sure I bring my points across. And the speaker shoots it down, but the vote goes to a vote. I was the only Republican that voted no. All other 9 just ditched it. And so that was a very quick tell of people will promise you things.
Sure.
And it never comes across.
That's always the way it is, it seems like.
And so those life lessons have come during this session. And you kind of see who your friends are and who you can trust. And over time, that's definitely morphed. And I think we have, but that being said, I think we're moving into a very respected range of where leadership can now look at, especially myself and a few others, and they say they might not always vote the way that we want them to vote, but they'll be honest with how we vote. And if we want them to change their vote, we'll go to them and we'll offer either a quid pro quo or in some way or some mechanism, something for their county and their district to make sure that they feel either comfortable and I have a whole way of how I judge those things, but we're definitely getting more and we're definitely respected more out of the Capitol than I think we've previously been. And we're definitely getting things done for our county that we needed to get done, and I'd love to go into that.
So let me back up a second so folks know. So what is your area? What's your territory? What's your district?
So I'm basically all of Catoosa County except 2 southern precincts, which is in the southwest. That's your state representative is Tarvin. And so he represents those 2 precincts, but I represent the rest of Catoosa County, and I'm just in Catoosa County.
Just Catoosa County.
I just luckily have 1 county.
Now, was it that way before when you went in? Has it always been a representative essentially just in Catoosa County, or has it been where in the past maybe you were in Catoosa and that district was in a little bit of another county? Or
well, that's another interesting segment we could get into because previously, back in the 90s and early 2000s, there was actually 2 or 3 state representatives per district. And so it'd be spread out, it'd be widened, and the gerrymandering in the early 2000s was ridiculous, especially around here. Basically, our district was North Catoosa all the way to Fannin County, and it would snake left, right, and sideways.
Wow.
It was just one giant snake. And so it's definitely changed over the years, but ever since a Republican majority, we've had pretty much the same boundaries, which was about 2010. It started changing and it stayed pretty consistently. We've moved 1 precinct over and traded one in 2020. But other than that, it's stayed pretty consistent.
So we've got one. So essentially, Catoosa County, we have actually two representatives with you and Tarvin.
Yes, sir.
But primarily, you're just majority of. I mean, you're
Exactly
over 90% of Catoosa
Yes,
County,
sir. And
especially population-wise.
And I am very thankful for Tarvin to work with Tarvin. We have a very good working relationship, and so something that we have power of is as a local delegation is, say a county commissioner or a city wants to either change their charter or they want to get a local referendum passed through. They have to go through us to get it on a local legislation and put it on the ballot. And so it's very crucial that me and Tarvin have a very good working relationship so we can get anything done,
Sure.
because we can veto each other. And then, of course, the state senator can veto whatever we're doing. And so it's a very interesting dynamic, but definitely me and I'm very blessed to be able to work with Tarvin.
So in your 2 years, have the county commission or the city of Fort Oglethorpe and the city of Ringgold, have they brought forth things to you and said, hey, here's areas that we really need help with at the state level, and that you've gone down and championed for us in Catoosa County and brought back home?
Absolutely. So over the last 2 years, I mean, it's been a very interesting road even locally. We were kind of talking about earlier how Catoosa County, going back in political history a little bit, has had kind of two groups, the anti-establishment and the establishment, really going at it locally. And
Oh, yeah, we're going at it lately, locally hard, yes.
Yes, sir. And so when I when I first ran, I ran on the anti-establishment ticket because I'm a young 28-year-old who's going to look at me and say he's establishment. And I mean, not only that, but I do fundamentally believe in the values that are preached, that our county won. We need to stave back development a little bit and make sure that we grow in sustainable ways, that we definitely look at our budgets and question everything, because right now we are in such a transitional period. And I ran on the platform of basically saying, I'm here to fight for change, but to change what I grew up in. I want to keep what we had I grew up right off of a 2A, and I love that area. I mean, I want my children to be able to grow up in the same woods that I grew up in.
Sure.
I want them to experience the same Catoosa County I got to experience. And the problem is we're growing so fast that we're losing that, and we're losing that spirit, and it's really changing the dynamics of this county. And so specifically, I ran on basically saying, I'm fighting for change, but I'm doing it to preserve what we have. And so, of course, the county officials and even city officials were really questioning what kind of change does he want to bring to the table? Like, how radical is this individual? Because,
Sure.
Again, I came out of nowhere. I grew up here, but a lot of those people just didn't know me. We didn't have the same social circles. And so I was someone out of nowhere. And so it took about a year to build that trust up and to show that I'm here just to work for the people. I'm here to say, this is what we need. Tell me what we need so I can also champion it. But at the same time, I'm going to judge for myself what I believe this county needs, because it's a separation of powers, but it's an equalization of powers. And so over a year, I worked with the county and the cities, and I've watched them struggle with property tax appraisals. I've seen them struggle with property tax increases, and I'm very blessed to have a very good working relationship with the superintendent of our schools, Chance Nix.
Correct. Yeah. Good man.
He is. And so very early on, I sat down and was like, education is one of my focuses. What can I do to make sure that we have the same system that we have, because I see so much burden that you're getting from overdevelopment. How can I help you relieve some of the stress? He's like, this is our issues. And I was like, these are fundamental issues, and I'd love to go into that in a minute. But they are deep fundamental issues. And it's going to take decades for us to be able to change those code sections, those laws, just because as a state representative, it takes 6, 8, 10 years to start really getting anything done. So I was like, where can we kind of focus on bringing more resources to bear, but at the same time relieve our citizens a little bit, to where it gives us something to build up on it,
Sure.
to long-term plan. And so property taxes and education was my primary focus on this. And I sat down with the counties and the cities, and they're like, our appraisals are out of whack, we're having to go up on our property taxes. And me and the county struggled a little bit on our views of property taxes and the role of government in those property taxes. But quickly I saw that property tax is not the answer. property tax is an outdated mode and system that we use to tax the people. It grows at a revenue increase of 2-3%. Well, in times of Biden and his inflation policies, inflation's growing 6-7%.
Sure, falling behind.
And those revenues do not keep up. And so very quickly, we have revenue issues, which is why you're seeing property taxes continuously increase. So we're going to have to find new sources of revenue or new ways to cut spending. And I think you have to do both. You can't just do one and have another. And so specifically, I kind of went down this direction with the school system. Is, well, what if we changed out our property tax for sales tax? Because sales tax increases 7, 8, 9% a year. And because of the growth we do have on our market side in the county, we're having good sustainable growth there. It matches inflation. This is something we should probably go down the avenue. And others in the county and the cities were very on board with this thought. Chuck Harris, he's like, I completely want a sales tax over property taxes. So he was very on board with this issue. And so that was something that I began to focus on about a year ago. That's something that I'll get into, and we had a very big win on that locally and statewide.
I think we definitely everybody would love to get into that because
Yes.
if there's a way to alleviate that burden, which so many of us have right now with our property tax bills. And I know a large majority of that goes to the school system, and we all love our schools here in Catoosa County. Yes. But at the end of the day, you're right, we're falling behind, and then that ends up coming back on, say, the county commission or other places, and everybody's like, why are you raising our property taxes? Which sometimes they don't have control over that. But I think a sales tax, so yes, we would love to get into how are you, or what's the plan to try to combat that?
Absolutely. Let's get into that then. So we very quickly saw sales tax is the way to go over property taxes. And I was like, I spent about 6 months just diving into sales tax law, because that's my love. I'm a policy nerd, and I'm a tax code love for whatever reason. And so I just go through and I just read it and paid attention to it and studied it and tried to tweak it and change it to see how it could fit our needs, but also state needs and have a good balance. Because I can come up with the best system in the world, but if I can't get it past Atlanta, it means nothing.
That's right.
So I kind of had an idea going down there. There is what's called a LOST, which is a local option sales tax. We currently have that in Catoosa County. Basically, what that does is it takes a millage rate, which is probably about 2.5 millage rate, and takes it down, and instead it offsets it with a sales tax. Every county can either choose a LOST or a HOST. And a HOST is a homestead option sales tax. What that means is it's basically based off residential property taxes, and that 1% sales tax offsets your home value of what they appraise it for. And so that was the two options on the books, but you couldn't have both. So first I wanted to say, well, what if we could have both? Because in Catoosa County, if we just went up 1 more cent, we wouldn't have residential property taxes from a county and a city level at all.
So to break it down, because, some of us in the community are a little slow, right?
Yes.
So we pay 7 cents on the dollar right now, essentially, right? And we just went through this year. Wow, there was a big fight, right?
Yes.
No new tax, and that's not a new tax. It's a continuation, and that was a big fight. But at the end of the day, 60-40, it got passed where we kept our sales tax at 7%. Now, I know in Walker County, their tax over there is higher than ours.
Yes.
And obviously Hamilton County is 2% higher than ours, a little more than 2%. So what you're saying is we would look to add another cent, maybe go to 8 cents, but that penny there would go towards
The homeowner.
property taxes in the county.
Well, just the homeowner property.
Just the homeowner.
That would be HOST. That was our focus. Because if we could just completely relieve residential property taxes, that would be a huge burden relief on our citizens. That's almost a 33% tax reduction for every homeowner. And again, it grows better. That means we have more sustainable planning financially. It was a better option for us. And so they're like, well, you're a freshman. Good luck. The county was like, good luck with that.
Sure.
The cities were like, good luck with that. You're a freshman. They just kind of put it up as it's Mitchell's harebrained scheme. Let her go fight for it in Atlanta. So I did. I went to the chairman of Ways and Means, Shaw Blackman. Ways and Means is a tax committee in the State House. And we just talked it out for about an hour. I was like, what can I do? Because sales tax laws, The current sales tax laws that we had on the books were very specific to specific counties. They were overburdensome. They were underburdensome. They were very restrictive. They were unrestricted. It was a wide variety and a smorgasbord of things that really don't fit together from a state perspective. And so, one, I'm for simple codes because I believe if you can, as a layman, cannot go to your code book and know what the law says, then you have an issue.
Right.
And that's the problem with our current sales tax law in the state of Georgia. It was very cumbersome. And so Shaw also agreed with that perspective. He's like, I want, what can we do to limit that? And that was one of his main asks was, can we get rid of all these others and get a single one to where we just throw out half the book of sales tax law and put this one little code section in and we're all happy. And so he devised what was called a FLOST, a flexible local option penny sales tax. And so I crafted a bill. I dropped a bill to allow a loss and a host at the same time, and then he crafted a bill that was identical to mine, and then added his FLOST into it, which I really loved. His mind on taxes is very interesting, and we put it together, and he dropped his bill. So with him dropping a bill, it was leadership's bill, and that means it's going to go all the way because you don't mess with the Ways and Means chairman.
Right.
And so I was very excited. I was like, we have something here. So the FLOST was originally designed for property tax relief, but also we could, some counties needed it for capital project funding. And if we had SPLOST issues, if we had other issues, we could offset some of those losses to mainly focus on transportation and other needs and use that FLOST. So I was very excited about those mechanisms to where we can relieve the local burden. And so we get it to the House committee, and they had to throw out all those capital funding, and so it's just based on property taxes. And I'm like, I'm fine with this.
Sure.
This is exactly what I wanted. And so we passed it through the House. The Senate, though, was a problem. And so the state Senate said, we don't care about sales taxes. We want to focus on capping adjustments. So your viewers, so your property is appraised by the local appraising board every couple of years, and they decide how much it goes up, how much the market value of your new affordable new house. And to be fair to them, they have to match it somewhat to inflation. The problem is, rarely does that really happen, and in actuality. And second is the state has one book and the locals have one book. And most of the time, the state book is very highly valued versus the local book. And what that means, specifically on like an education level, is we're getting less education funding because we're more overvalued and more of a richer county than what the locals say we are. And so we're getting less state funding because of these offsetting books. So the books are out of balance. There's problems with appraising. There's problems with the bureaucracy of it. There's problems with it's just a very cumbersome system. And so, but what the state Senate wanted to do was, well, I know it's a cumbersome system, so we're just going to cap it. And so if they wanted to cap it just at 3%, well, inflation's 7%.
Right.
That means every year, county governments and city governments are declining 4% in value a year on the basis of the dollar. And what that means is cutting of services and cutting of other things. Now, yes, every budget has about 1 or 2% at least wiggle room to where you can cut back. But that truly means cutting services if you go 4% every year. I mean, at a point, there's no more fat to trim, and you're trimming essentials.
Right.
And so I am fundamentally against the 3% cap because it just does not work on the local level. I mean, it's a great idea. I want to cap spending. I'm all for it. But if you don't match it with inflation, it doesn't work. And so so the Senate was focusing on the 3% cap. We wanted the sales tax focus, and so we passed it through the House about a couple of days before crossover day, and crossover day is when all the House bills go to the Senate and all the Senate bills come to us. And so we passed it through crossover day, which is the first major hurdle, and we were very excited, but it almost died in the Senate until the final day of session, which is called Sine Die. So Sine Die comes around, and I'm bothering the chairman every day. I'm like, "Where's our bill? What can I do? What can I do to help? Who do I need to talk to? What can I do?" And this is my baby. And he's like, "I know, Mitchell. Just we're working on it. We're walking on it." And so I was like, I talked to Chuck Hofstetter, was the Senate Finance Chairman, and Shaw, and we were going back and forth on this. and it was a lot of negotiating in the final couple of hours, but we got it through with a compromise bill. So what the compromise bill says is there's going to be some form of cap. It's going to be based on inflation. It's called a floating homestead exemption. It's going to be matched with inflation, but if counties have these, they can have an additional 1% sales tax to offset property taxes. So I was like, that's good enough. It's compromise. We're not all happy with it, but that's what you do in Atlanta. You have to compromise to get what you want.
Sure.
And they were going to do that anyway, so might as well get what you wanted with it. And so we passed the bill almost unanimously in the House. They passed it in the Senate. And we finally have the tools that we need locally to be able to do that. And it'll go into place hopefully in a year or two, where the county and the cities now have to negotiate between themselves what percentage of that 1% they get. And that's going to be the big sticking point. Everybody wants a better percentage for themselves.
Sure. So will the voters have the last say here locally?
Yes.
As to, okay, so it'll go on a ballot at some point in time to say, like the SPLOST that just happened, do you want this?
Yes.
So there's going to have to be some education come out, obviously,
Absolutely.
with this to explain, because everybody hates a tax increase.
Oh, absolutely. And I can spend all day talking about this and educating, and I'd love to. And we probably will in the future.
We'll circle back.
Yeah,
we'll have to, because there'll have to be an educational piece
absolutely.
out there to explain, because everybody's going to come out on a side saying, well, you know, if I don't own a home, then this doesn't benefit me. And then there'll be the folks over on the left saying, yeah, but it's a sales tax referendum, so we're not all shouldering the burden. Anybody that comes from out of town and spends $1 here in the county, they're
Exactly.
contributing as well. And this is beneficial to us as citizens because it relieves this tax burden. And so there's going to have to be a whole lot of education on this coming
absolutely.
forward. So, yeah, we won't get into all of it now, but that's definitely, I know folks out there, first thought was, well, wait a minute, y'all passed it, so this is coming. No, the county, the citizens here get their voice heard.
Yes, and first the county and the cities have to negotiate what they want, a part of their 1%. They want their cut of the chain. That's going to be their
because the
next big fight.
last time they just talked about that was a whole
Yes.
fight there. So
But I mean, that's how the bacon is made.
That's right.
So
All right.
so they just have to figure how they want to do their spending. And their allocations of resources.
But congratulations! I mean, at the end of the day, there's an opportunity
Exactly.
for something that wasn't on the table before, and so as a state representative, that's what's going on behind the scenes that we don't know about that could potentially benefit all of us in Catoosa County.
Exactly, because Catoosa County, we're one of the few counties that with a 1% sales tax, if we properly spent, because I do think there's still a lot of fat in our budget, frankly, in a county. But that being said, if we slim just a little bit, and we look at, okay, these are our resources. With a 1% sales tax, I honestly think we could get rid of all property taxes in Catoosa County from a county and city standpoint. Schools, unfortunately, are a whole other issue, and that's a bigger well to tackle. You gotta take it bite by bite.
But when you say that, if my property tax bill is $1,000, you're not talking about my whole $1,000 will go away. You're talking about
I'm talking about 33%.
33%. So
Yep.
my tax bill now would be $666 and not $1,000 essentially.
But the good thing about this bill is it does two things. Because I know there's a lot of, well, how do we know it's going to actually do what you say it is? One, it specifically goes, so whenever they get this sales tax revenue, you're going to get a property tax bill that says, because of this tax, your property tax value is now this much less. And that's a requirement on the bill. The second thing is a check we have in place, and I've already told the counties and the cities this. If they are not scaling back property taxes, the state legislature gets to decide if it's continued, not the locals. And so, I mean, they still get to say, yeah, we still want it, but if they don't properly cut back and roll back, I can promise you it's not going to be extended.
Sure.
And so, because the entire focus, and I told this to the counties, I told this to the cities, my entire focus is we have to relieve your property tax burden. It's going to be a giant weight around our system. It's going to the laws on the books for property tax are going to get worse. It's going to bind the hands of the counties and the cities, and it's not going to be to the benefit of the citizens, because what's going to happen is they're going to have to cut massively into services. They're going to have to completely relook at how they fund revenues, and so we're going to have to look at sales tax eventually. It's just get rid of property tax and focus on the true.
Sure.
Because sales tax is luckily set with the economy. So if we're growing our economy, if we're working our fields, doing God's work of tilling the soil, we're going to grow, and we're going to have more revenue, and we're going to have more services and more resources to do those services. And that's why I think sales tax is so much better than our property taxes, because it's not a tax on rent. it's a tax on capability.
Sure. Yeah, like I said, that's got to be a whole different conversation because
Exactly.
you've got some folks saying, well, all you're doing is taking robbing from Peter to pay Paul. But so there's got to be a lot of conversation, like
Exactly.
an educational standpoint, to understand really what it's going to do and how it'll affect us. So that was great. So what else got happened or accomplished down there?
Absolutely. So the other big thing, education now I'm focused on. Something I'm very proud of is, so we get the state budget. And the first year I voted against the state budget. I was one of the only two in in about 20 years to vote against the state budget. And I voted on it against it because at the time we had about a $4 billion surplus. And all it was new spending for salaries, bureaucratic stuff, and other things that they saw as issues. But it didn't do. But we were still taking out debt. I was like, we have $4 billion in surplus, but you're still taking out $1 billion in debt. And so I was like, and not only that, they didn't even know the bond rates that we were taking it on. So we made a big stink about bond rates, and then the next book that they gave us had the bond rates in them, and they were very high. And I go to Chairman of Appropriations, like, why is our bond rates so high? And he's like, honestly, I don't know. We have a AAA rating. We have one of the best ratings of credit in the country, and our bond rate is about twice as high as the federal government. And so I was like, I can't support this. I was like, these bond rates are just too high. I am not for new debt on any level. And so, and again, we had the funding. I was like, why are we using the credit card when we have $4 billion sitting here? We have the cash to do it. And so I negotiated with leadership a little bit, but they weren't budging. I wasn't budging. So I voted no. The first time I actually voted yes because it was still through the process. We were still working on it. And that was called a procedural vote to get it through the House, to get it to the Senate. And I was like, if these don't change, I will be voting no. I was the first person to switch my vote to no when it came back around. And I got a lot of heat on it because they're like, why'd you vote no on it? I was like, because I don't agree with it. And so it definitely added debt and a surplus budget. So come this year. So this year, it was a completely different mindset. We had a $7 billion surplus. And out of that surplus, we completely paid down last year's debt and this year's debt. We have no new debt for my entire tenure as state representative.
That's great.
And that wasn't just because of me. That was Chairman Hatchett, and that was House leadership really pushing that ball, and then realizing, why are we taking out debt when we have all this surplus cash? I mean, why are we burdening this? I mean, to give an equivalent, the amount of debt, which is $1 billion that they were taking out, that's $100 million yearly from now to basically eternity, because let's be frank, we don't pay down debt, really.
Sure.
And that $100 million is enough money to fund all the transportation needs we have in the state, bus-wise. It's enough funding to give free lunches to every student in the state of Georgia. There's other things we can use this revenue on perpetually instead of paying down debt. And so leadership looked at that and they're like, yeah, we're not going to do any more debt. And so for the first time, again, in almost 20, 30 years, we don't have any new debt in the state budget at all. For capital projects, for anything. It was completely paid down and put in a separate category, to where I was like, that was my main concern. Okay. And so that was my big ask. I got other things, specifically another big ask that I went down on there was bus driving funding. So I have, my kids are in public school in Ringgold. And we wait probably once a week for an hour, 2 hours at a time for the bus just to get to the house. And I mean, you can go drive down there and try to pick up your kids, but it's going to take you an hour just to sit in that traffic anyway.
Sure.
So I was like, might as well just get them dropped off at our house. But probably once a week, this entire school season, we've had to wait an hour. And as a parent, I find that ridiculous. So I've asked the superintendent, I was like, why? He's like, I just don't have funding. There's not enough local funding, because what has happened over the past 20, 30 years, the state said, we're going to help you pay for bus drivers. When they first started the program, they were paying 50-50. They never allocated money back to that account. And so this is the importance of funding, is over time, funding, the expenditures and the costs went up, but that amount stayed the same. And so it went from 50% to 18%.
Wow.
And all that was shouldered onto the local populace. And so our bus drivers aren't keeping up with pay. At all. I mean, you can go to Hamilton County, you can go to Dalton for $3-4 an extra, and so it was a very big concern. And so we went down there, and I was going to just present a bill to basically say 50-50 funding, because I'm against state mandates completely. If the state comes if the state comes to the county and says you have to do this, you have to pay. We should at least pay 50% of it,
Right?
Because we're the ones saying you have to do it. And so I was going to present a bill that did 50-50, but leadership was like, just hold off on that. We're working here. And I was like, okay, well, we need something. We have to have some funding, especially we have, again, $7 billion in surplus. We need funding. And they're like, what about this? And they did a 40% match for locally. So it went from 18% to 40% locally. And that will be a huge plus come next year and the years after, because, again, it's going to take some of that burden off local entities to be able to match that bus driving funding. So that was a huge win, in my opinion, for education. Something else we did was mental health transportation. It was a small ask, but it was about $2 million ask. We got about $1.5 million. And so I was very excited about that. Another issue I was focusing on was a border, it's a border tax expenditure. And so what that means is if you're in a certain border area, and previously they'd actually already passed the House and Senate in a bill to say, there's this mechanism here to basically, if you're in Catoosa County, Walker County, if you're in South Georgia next to the Florida border, and Tennessee's taxes are better because of gases, because of other income taxes, other things, we'll offset that a little bit, a certain amount, and for businesses to be able to compete in Catoosa County and locally. And that was already passed. It was already there. We just never funded it. And so I was like, is that true? And they're like, yeah, you just never funded it. And so we went around, and I got every single state rep from the entire surrounding area to write a letter to Chairman Hatch and say, we need some funding. Asked for 20 mil, we got one. But it's something, because it's something to show that we can slowly move that needle to get more funding, specifically locally, to make sure that we offset that border. Because, I mean, you can tell the business difference between East Ridge and Catoosa County. There's definitely a lot more sales tax revenue right there across the border than there is in Catoosa County. And I want to bring some of that to Catoosa County, because if we're going to focus on sales taxes, we need that funding to offset our other costs. And so that was a focus we had on the budget. And then lastly, was definitely a big issue in Northwest Georgia, is election integrity. And so when I first got elected, I wasn't really focused on election integrity. I was focused on budget, education. And I was like, okay, well, let me look into this issue. So I look into it, and there was clear bureaucratic worry. Something that I always joke about is looking under the hood of state bureaucracy is like, and just slowly closing. It's not a good thing to look under. I love how every bureaucratic director likes to say, no, my department is great, and then as a individual you have to deal with that department. And I'm sure as a citizen, it's a terrible process to have to actually deal with it in a whole different light. And so the state election board and the Secretary of State's office was going at it like cats and dogs, and there's a lot of issues and a lot of promises made that were not kept. There are a lot of issues there bureaucratically that, to be frank, we weren't addressing to where it was compromising our election integrity, in my opinion. And it could have compromised our election integrity in the future, especially if other state entities tried to mess in Georgia's election system. And so just looking at it from a non-biased point of view, I was like, there's actually some serious worry here, because I think it can be seriously manipulated if we don't fix some of these problems. And leadership, luckily, again, heard our rally cry. I had about 10 to 15 state reps that was also looking into this issue, because they were getting a lot of heat back home for it. And they're like, there's an issue here. And so we were able to look at it non-biasedly and say, what can we do? And the Senate did the same thing, and we were able to pass conjoining bills to basically slowly fix our election system, to separate the state election board and the Secretary of State's office, to provide more funding for both of those offices, to look at how we can streamline the bureaucratic process, and more importantly, making sure every voter feels comfortable with their ballots. And so we're doing a new watermark on your ballot that's going to be visible. That way, without a shadow of doubt, that's your ballot.
Right.
And second is we're going to take away the QR code eventually. And it probably won't be this election. It'll probably be a couple elections down the road. But that way, without a shadow of doubt, I mean, that's how Tennessee does it. They just they scan it, the whole thing in, and they do it. So the machines and stuff is out there. It'll cost roughly the state about $5 million, but the state's going to already allocated the money and already is going to burn that. And so I think this was a fair bill, fair balance, and I think we're finally moving that ball down range to where, again, if you aren't confident in your vote, the vote is the most important thing as a citizen you have.
Sure.
I mean, it decides your entire future. It decides
That's
who's making your decisions on budgets. It decides who's making your choices on education policy, on everything. And so that's why I took it with such gusto. We have to have secure elections because we have to feel comfortable in voting. And something I definitely see as I love door knocking in campaigns. And just hearing what people are saying at the door, and they're like, "Why should I trust the election?" I mean, there are others saying they're stolen, and others saying, "Why should I go vote?" I was like, if you don't go vote, your voice will never be heard. And second is the reason we are losing the state of Georgia, and it is going purple, is because people up here are not voting in the ways they used to. And so we have to get everybody we can to go vote. And people are like, well, if you push election integrity, you're questioning, and it's going to make people not go vote. I'm like, no, go vote. If you do not vote, this problem will never be solved. And so I'm a big proponent. Go vote, make sure your voice is heard, but it's my responsibility to make sure that vote is cast properly and done properly. And so that's kind of why I've taken such a interest in that, in that subject.
So when is the next session? You just got done with session, what, 2 weeks ago?
2 weeks ago, yes, sir. Most likely there will probably be a special session. They've come and done a special session every year now. I'm actually an advocate for having a session sometime in late, like August or early September, somewhere around there, just to clean up for like 10 days. Just clean up whatever's happening statewide, and that way we can fix it on the ground, not once a year. But right now on the books, next session is January.
Okay, wow.
So, because it's election season. So we're going to see, right now it's primaries, and then it's a general election. And we're seeing some very interesting things in the field. And specifically up in Catoosa County, we felt, in my opinion, and realized how much different, A, we are from Atlanta, and two, how much the state is different from us. And the state is slowly swinging purple to where our voices, if we lose the majority in the House, we'll lose all voice in the House. We'll still have the Senate, but it's going to be a much more contentious state. It's going to have, if we lose the House, education policy can start swinging Democrat, and we can see what that looks like in Gwinnett and Fulton County. They push definitely gender-based studies. They push left-wing ideology in those schools. I mean, there's literally a individual, we had one of the bills that we had in the state was actually a school board district map. Is because as a state we decide most maps in the state, and it was very contentious because it was basically, is it a Republican leaning or a Democrat leaning district? And the Democrat that was running in this lean district was pro putting LGBTQ studies in schools for children.
Wow.
And so we have a very different value system in Catoosa County than Atlanta does. And I fear that if we lose those 8 seats, and it will happen 6, 8, 10 years from now, we're going to have a very different state and a very, very different process of how we're going to have to go about doing things, and how that affects local education, local counties, local school boards, because they are very heavy-handed on how they do their policy. And if you don't abide by the democratic ways of whatever they're saying in the Capitol, they're going to, it's going to be a whole different perspective from the rural counties, and we're going to regret when we said, I wish we could have stopped the Republicans from losing the state house.
Right.
And that's going to be a big fight ahead. And I think, and my ask to Catoosa County is, please look into this. Please help us fight this storm, because it's coming. And I mean, you can talk to other state reps in this area. They'll agree that it's coming probably in 6 to 8 years, and we have to start bracing for it and start preparing to see what's going to happen. How do we stop this, and how can we personally go down there and campaign for Republicans and get them elected in these areas?
So looking forward to next session, I know it is a campaign year, and so that makes it a little difficult to kind of see. But I mean, what things have you looked at that next session locally you want to see happen?
Absolutely. So right now, my entire focus is on this 1% sales tax. I want to get this across the finish line. Hopefully next session. If it might take 2 years, that's kind of what my next term is going to be. I'm very thankful to the citizens of Catoosa County for electing me to my second term without having a challenger. I think that shows that there's a lot of faith in the community for what we're trying to do. And so I'm very thankful for that, and I'm not taking it for granted. I want to see this 1% sales tax finalized. That takes a lot of work with the county and the cities. It's kind of on their plate now, but I still have to kind of shepherd it across the finish line. And I'm very excited to work with the county and the cities for that. Second, that I'm really focused on is opening up communication channels between the county and the cities. I'm going to try to do an open meeting with the counties and the city officials, hopefully late May, but most likely probably June at this point because of the elections and other things going on. And so I'm hoping to have a big meeting with the county and just start opening up the communication levels to get that across. And 3, education. The problem in Catoosa County we're going to face is with our development still increasing. Right now we have, I think, 875 new homes coming to Catoosa County. That's almost 2% of new homes in this area, which means a 2% increase in students, a 2% increase in their needs service-wise and government-wise of how do we find funding for this new 2%. And our problem in education is we're at capacity in our schools. We're at capacity on what we can do educational-wise. I mean, they're still trying to find ways to slim the budget because their taxes aren't keeping up. They're relying on property taxes, and these new laws that are coming into effect will dramatically affect their revenue sources to where it's going to hurt them even more. And so while their revenues are contracting, the need is growing.
Right.
And so how to offset that is going to be a long-term fight. And unfortunately, we don't really have a lot of tools that are accessibility right now, and we're still working on it. We're still trying to find that out, but it's going to take a good while. And while that happens, we're going to have to brace and adapt to this new reality. And so something I want to focus on is how do we get more state funding for education? How do we get more state funding? How do we reallocate those formulas? Because those formulas are very offset to either cities or county education boards that the formulas are messed up, and everybody knows they're messed up. It's such a heavy lift to do that no one really wants to bet their entire political capital on it. And so it's just hard to get anything across the finish line there. And to be able to be frank, luckily with the sales tax law, no one really thought it would be such a big deal until they realized, oh wow, this could change all our equations that we're doing. We don't have that kind of solution for the education system, and so it's just trying to figure that out and find what we can do and how we can help. And it's going to be a lot more massaging because I do want to stress, as a freshman, you don't get anything done. And so I'm very honored and very humbled to say I'm glad we can get this done to where for the next couple of years and next couple of terms that I'm serving, until we have seniority in the House, that we can actually get something done locally and focus locally on bringing more resources to the table to see how we can fix these problems and start planning to fix these problems. I think that's the big issue that Catoosa County really faces.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I always talk about too is, sometimes we get too focused on today, right? Because, those problems are in your face, right? But we need to be looking down the road 5, 10, 15, 20 years and trying to get the problems fixed now before they become problems, right? And what are we going to do now, today, to make sure we're not having those issues down the road instead of just focusing on today? Because that's huge. That's, like you talked about with growth, and that's always going to be a topic of discussion because with Chattanooga up there in Hamilton County,
absolutely,
we've become a bedroom community, right? There's a lot of growth that has come down this way and a lot of folks that work in Hamilton County but live in Catoosa County. And that's not a bad thing. But the growth that we have, we've got to make sure that we're infrastructure-wise ready for it and we can support it, and we don't let it get out of hand. I mean, I've talked about it with you and other folks. You go ride down Ooltewah-Ringgold Road and you look at our beautiful Ooltewah-Ringgold Road from Ringgold to East Brainerd Road, And then once you cross over East Brainerd Road and you're into Hamilton County and you take that same stretch, it used to look like this. It doesn't anymore. There's subdivisions everywhere.
Exactly.
And so, we've just got to look and say, hey, dude, we don't want to turn into something that we really don't want to be. And more importantly, we've got to make sure that our schools stay at this high level, and that's managing growth.
And I completely agree. And my problem is we don't have sustainable growth right now. Specifically, right now we're about 3-4 years out zoning wise of new suburbs coming online. So that means we have you can ask the school system. We have 2, 3, 4 years of suburbs. We don't even know what's going online coming from. And right now we're at 875 houses just this year. So if we can just assume it's roughly 900, that's almost 10% more students during that time period. Second, it takes us 8 years. If we decide to have a new school today, it takes us 8 years to have a new school. And we're already at capacity. Third, every new school is roughly $100 million.
Sure, that's the biggest thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we don't have that money. And so it's how do we get that money? And so my problem is we haven't, and that's why I kind of ran is, these problems they could have been seen in the rearview mirror, and they could have been seen back then because we just grew at such a quick rate that we're finally now having to pay the bill.
Right.
I mean, everybody ate for free now. Now the bill's coming, and so we're gonna see this realization for a couple of years of it's gonna be a struggle. Because there's just financially and mathematically, there's just no other way to cross these streams. And so I think you're going to see this problem for about 2-3 years really buckle on itself. And it's like, why do we not have the state funding? Why do we not have more funding here? Or why is our services dwindling here? Or why is there sewer or water projects or affordable housing? You're going to see all of this start colliding with itself because it's all really wrapped up into a single issue, which is we overdeveloped. We just didn't develop sustainably. And now we're going to be paying the bill for a couple of years and figuring out, okay, one, do we slow it down? How do we slow it down? What does that mean by slowing it down? And so there's a lot of hard questions we have to ask ourselves. And on top of that, what's our vision? Like, what do we want Catoosa County to really be? And I've asked this to the county, I've asked this to cities, and each one has a different answer. And that's not a good thing because that means they're all going in different directions. And like I've heard, well, we want to be a bedroom community. Well, we want to bring in more industry. We want to bring in more manufacturing. We want to bring in more sales. And I'm not here to decide what the county wants to do or the cities do. I'm just here saying we just need one vision, so we're all marching to the same tune and get the resources that priority lists.
Sure, all the resources need to be in place. And,
Exactly.
I had the school board members, Gloria Hunt and Susan Gibson on last episode, and they talked about growth, and they're like, look, we're managing it. We're doing a good job of that. The school system is intact. We're not letting it get overburdened, and you could see that, but they also know, like you see, it's coming, and we just need to have. And I asked them, do we have any new schools in the line and they said, no, we're fine right now. But Heritage is getting close to capacity, right? And so they understand their burden as well to make sure we don't get to a point where we're having to see trailers out all around the school grounds to have extra classrooms and they won't let it get that way. I think, one thing about our school board and Chance Nix and all of them there, they are so passionate about our school systems that they're going to make sure absolutely no way they get caught off guard with this.
Yes.
But they also see that we've got to do some things, and legislative wise, you're working on that as well. So, yeah, I mean, growth is always going to be a topic of conversation.
Yes.
If you rolled back 20 years ago into Catoosa County, and I'm sure they were talking about growth then, right? Hey, we're growing, and we'll be talking about it 20 years from now.
Oh, absolutely.
But like you said, we've just got to, and that's why I said, you've got to look out to that. You can't just focus on today because you'll get caught flat-footed.
Exactly. And I mean, there's infrastructure needs we have, sewer, water. What are we doing here? Something we're also working on, like city and countywide, is what's our water system looking like? We're pulling so much from TVA and Chattanooga. Can we get something locally? Can we relook at that issue? And there's things on the board. Hopefully we can get down that road, but I think it's going to take some time to do that. But yeah, there are infrastructure issues. Like you're saying, the school board. Yeah, the school board is definitely looking at this as a long-term problem. And that's why the school system and the school board and the superintendent specifically, I'm I am blessed to have him. I could not stress that enough.
Sure.
His leadership and his administration is excellent, on par. We talk every day in session, and so I couldn't ask for. But I call him my general in the field. I was like, I'm just a politician. Tell me what you need.
That's right.
I'm trying to get you the resources.
Yeah, well, we've been lucky. I mean, Dina Reese did a phenomenal job in her tenure as school superintendent. And the things that she brought to the county are amazing. And then they just went right and said, hey, who's the next in line? And Chance has just been amazing. So, that's the thing. You've always got to have that leadership in place to champion for the right things. So how can anybody, so we're going into next year, the average citizen, we talked about this, with the county commission or the city councils, citizens can come, show up, and they can get 5 minutes and they could talk about their concerns or needs or things. How can people get a hold of Mitchell Horner about, hey, Mitchell, glad to meet you in this forum, but hey, I've got some concerns. So how can they reach out to you and talk to you?
Absolutely. Please, my office is always, you can always call down to my Atlanta office. You can look that up by Mitchell at house at georgia.gov. That's online, but more specifically, please reach out to me personally. My phone number, I don't mind giving it out.
No, go ahead.
Is 423-260-6804. Please call me directly. I will try to pick up. I'm sometimes busy during the day working, but outside that, I'll call you back. You can feel free to text me. You can email me. I'll put my email in my description on the Facebook link that I'll put up. I'm on Facebook, Mitchell Horner. Please look me up. I'm here to work for you guys. I'm your representative, and I was telling Mr. Thorpe, I kind of have a lot more say in people's lives than a lot of people realize. I decide education, I decide Medicaid policy, I decide taxpayer policy, I decide taxes, and help decide the conversation down in Atlanta. We have probably more power in Atlanta than a congressperson does in Washington and a county commissioners do in your local business. We decide a lot of different facts during those 40 days. And we can help on state issues, like your tags, Medicaid. If you have any problems with state services, we can help with that. We're here to serve you, but we have a lot of influence in your life, and I want to hear from you guys. And that's my responsibility. And yes, feel free to always reach out to me.
Well, thank you. And thank you for coming on.
Oh, absolutely.
And until next time, thanks for everybody for watching. Have a great week.
Yeah, you and I as one will always be better than